Introduction. What if I told you that the world's largest country wasn't always destined to be a sprawling giant, stretching across continents and time zones? Russia, a nation so vast it covers more land than Pluto, is a place where the sun rises in the Pacific and sets in Europe, all within the same borders. But how did this immense patchwork of forests, tundra, mountains, and cities come to exist? Was it pure luck, ruthless ambition, or a series of accidents that turned a collection of warring tribes into a superpower that would one day challenge the world? The story of Russia's rise isn't just about maps and borders. It's a tale of relentless expansion, unexpected alliances, and the kind of power struggles that have shaped the fate of millions for centuries. Russia's size has been both its greatest weapon and its most daunting curse. Its sheer scale has repelled invaders, swallowed armies, and given its rulers a sense of invincibility. Yet, behind the numbers and the endless miles, lies a history filled with chaos, betrayal, and moments where the entire future of the nation hung by a thread. From the icy rivers of the north to the windswept steppes of the south, every inch of Russian territory has a story, some celebrated, others whispered about in the shadows of history. But what if the real secret to Russia's size isn't just about conquest or geography? What if it's about survival, adaptation, and a willingness to do whatever it takes to stay one step ahead of rivals and enemies? As we unravel the journey from scattered tribes to the world's largest country, you'll discover the hidden motives, the shocking betrayals, and the relentless drive that made Russia what it is today. And as you'll soon see, the path to becoming the world's biggest country was anything but straightforward. The real story is far more surprising than you might think, and it all begins long before the name Russia ever appeared on a map. The land before Russia, long before the world recognized anything called Russia. The land that would one day become its heart was a wild, unpredictable frontier. Imagine endless plains stretching as far as the eye can see, broken only by dense forests, winding rivers, and the occasional cluster of wooden huts. This was a place where survival depended on strength, cunning, and the ability to adapt to a landscape that could be both breathtakingly beautiful and brutally unforgiving. The region was a crossroads, a meeting point for countless tribes and cultures, each with their own customs, languages, and ambitions. Indo-European nomads roamed the steppes, Germanic warriors drifted through the forests, and mysterious tribes like the Scythians and Sarmatians left behind legends that still echo today. But this wasn't a land of peace. It was a patchwork of rival clans and shifting alliances, where power changed hands as quickly as the seasons. The mighty Volga River, now synonymous with Russian identity, was once a lifeline for traders and raiders alike, connecting distant settlements and serving as a highway for goods, ideas, and more often than not conflict. Over centuries, waves of invaders swept through, the fierce Huns, the wandering Goths, and countless others, each leaving their mark on the land and its people. Some came seeking riches, others simply a place to call home, but all contributed to the chaotic tapestry that would eventually give rise to something greater. Yet, for all its turmoil, this region was also a place of opportunity. The vast open spaces offered freedom to those willing to seize it, and the constant threat of invasion forced communities to grow stronger, more united, and more resourceful. It was here, in this crucible of conflict and cooperation, that the first seeds of a future nation were sown. But the transformation from scattered tribes to a unified state would require more than just luck. It would take the arrival of outsiders with a vision and a willingness to reshape the destiny of an entire continent. And as the centuries rolled on, the stage was set for a new power to emerge from the shadows, forever changing the fate of the land that would become Russia. The Viking influence and the birth of Rus. As the dust settled from centuries of tribal warfare, a new force began to shape the destiny of these wild lands, one that arrived not from the south or the east, but from the cold, stormy seas of the north. The Vikings, known in these parts as the Varangians, were far more than just raiders and plunderers. Driven by ambition and a hunger for new opportunities, they sailed their longships down the great rivers of Eastern Europe, carving out trade routes that would connect the Baltic to the Black Sea. These Norse adventurers didn't just pass through, they settled, mingling with the local Slavic tribes and leaving an indelible mark on the region's culture, language, and politics. It was during the 9th and 10th centuries that the first real glimmers of a Russian state began to appear. The Varangians established fortified settlements along the rivers, founding cities like Novgorod and Kiev, places that would become the beating heart of early Russian civilization. These cities weren't just trading posts. They were centers of power, ruled by Norse chieftains, who gradually adopted the customs and beliefs of the Slavic people around them. Over time, these rulers became known as the Rus, a name that would echo through history and eventually give rise to the word Russia itself. But the story of the Rus was more than just a tale of conquest. It was a story of transformation, as Norse and Slavic traditions blended to create something entirely new. The Rus built alliances, forged rivalries, and established a network of city-states that stretched from the icy lakes of the north to the fertile plains of the south. They brought with them new technologies, new ways of governing, and a fierce sense of independence that would define the region for centuries to come. Yet, even as these early states grew in power and influence, they remained vulnerable, caught between the ambitions of neighboring empires and the ever-present threat of invasion. The foundations of Russia had been laid, but the struggle for survival was far from over, and soon, a force unlike any the region had ever seen would descend from the east, threatening to sweep away everything the Rus had built. Mongol domination and the rise of Moscow. Just as the early Russian states were finding their footing, a storm was brewing far to the east, one that would change the course of history in ways no one could have predicted. In the 13th century, the Mongols, led by the legendary Genghis Khan and his ruthless successors, swept across the Eurasian steppe like a force of nature. Their armies moved with terrifying speed, crushing everything in their path and leaving entire cities in ruins. For the fledgling Rus principalities, the Mongol invasion was nothing short of catastrophic. Ancient cities like Kiev were razed to the ground, their populations scattered or enslaved, and the once thriving trade routes fell silent under the shadow of Mongol rule. But the Mongols, known in Russia as the Golden Horde, didn't just conquer, they controlled. They demanded heavy tribute from the surviving northern cities, forcing local princes to bow before their khans and pay for the privilege of survival. For nearly 2 centuries, the Mongol yoke hung over the land, shaping the politics, economy, and even the culture of the region. Yet, in this time of darkness, a new power began to rise from the ashes. The small, unassuming Principality of Moscow, once just another outpost on the map, started to grow in influence. Its rulers were shrewd, playing the Mongols and their rivals against each other, quietly amassing wealth and power, while others fought and fell. Moscow's secret weapon was its ability to adapt. While other cities resisted the Mongols and suffered for it, Moscow's princes became expert negotiators, securing privileges and titles that set them apart. Over generations, they used their position as tax collectors for the khans to expand their own authority, gradually uniting neighboring lands under their control. By the time the Mongol grip began to weaken in the 15th century, Moscow was ready to seize its moment. Under the leadership of ambitious rulers like Ivan III, the city cast off Mongol domination, refusing to pay tribute and rallying other Russian states to its cause. The fall of the Mongol yoke didn't just free Moscow, it transformed it into the heart of a new, centralized Russian state. The scars of Mongol rule would linger for centuries, shaping everything from military tactics to the autocratic style of government that would define Russia for generations. But out of this crucible of hardship and survival, Moscow emerged stronger than ever, ready to lead the next great chapter in the story of Russia's relentless expansion. And as the city's influence spread, a new era of ambition and conquest was about to begin, one that would push Russia's borders farther than anyone could have imagined. The Tsars and the drive eastward. Moscow now, at the center of a growing Russian state, the ambitions of its rulers soared to new heights. The age of the Tsars had arrived, and with it came a relentless hunger for land, power, and security. Ivan IV, remembered by history as Ivan the Terrible, was the first to claim the title of Tsar of all Russia. His reign was marked by both terror and transformation. Determined to secure his realm from threats on every side, Ivan launched a series of brutal campaigns against neighboring Khanates, crushing the remnants of Mongol power and pushing Russian influence deep into the Volga region. Cities like Kazan and Astrakhan fell to his armies, opening the gateway to the vast, untamed lands beyond the Ural Mountains. But Ivan's ambitions didn't stop at the edge of Europe. He set his sights on the endless wilderness of Siberia, land of mystery, legend, and unimaginable resources. The conquest of Siberia began not with grand armies, but with small bands of Cossacks, fierce and independent warriors who thrived on the frontier. These semi-nomadic fighters, skilled in horseback combat and survival, became the spearhead of Russian expansion. Driven by promises of land, freedom, and adventure, they crossed the Urals and plunged into the unknown, battling native tribes and rival powers as they went. The journey east was anything but easy. Siberia's forests and rivers were as dangerous as any enemy, and the distances involved were staggering. Yet, within a single century, Russian explorers had reached the shores of the Pacific Ocean, planting their flag on lands no European power had ever claimed. Along the way, they established forts, trading posts, and settlements, laying the groundwork for a new Russian empire that stretched from the Baltic to the Pacific. The lure of furs, gold, and other riches fueled this relentless drive. But so did a sense of destiny, a belief that Russia was meant to rule these endless lands. This eastward surge wasn't just about territory, it was about survival. The Tsars knew that controlling Siberia's resources would make Russia stronger, more resilient, and less vulnerable to foreign threats. Every new outpost, every conquered tribe, was another step toward securing the nation's future. By the dawn of the 18th century, Russia had become a true Eurasian giant, its borders spanning continents and its ambitions still growing. But as the Tsars looked westward, they saw new challenges and opportunities waiting on the horizon, ones that would test the limits of their power and reshape the destiny of the Russian state forever. Western ambitions and the age of empires. Russia's reach extended across the endless wilds of Siberia. Its rulers began to cast their gaze westward, toward the heart of Europe. The Tsars understood that true power meant more than just land. It required influence, prestige, and access to the world's most vital trade routes. No one embodied this vision more than Peter the Great, a ruler whose ambition was matched only by his willingness to break with tradition. Peter saw that Russia, for all its size, lagged behind the great powers of Europe in technology, culture, and military might. Determined to change this, he embarked on a bold campaign of modernization, traveling incognito through the capitals of Europe to learn their secrets. Firsthand, Peter's reforms were sweeping and often shocking. He forced the nobility to adopt Western dress, built a modern navy from scratch, and restructured the government to centralize his authority. But perhaps his most audacious move was the founding of a new capital, St. Petersburg, on the marshy shores of the Baltic Sea. This city, carved out of the wilderness at enormous human cost, was a symbol of Russia's new identity, a nation straddling east and west, determined to claim its place among Europe's elite. The struggle for access to the Baltic was fierce, culminating in the Great Northern War against Sweden. After years of brutal conflict, Peter emerged victorious, securing vital territory and opening Russia to the riches of European trade. Yet, the drive for expansion didn't end there. Catherine the Great, another towering figure in Russian history, continued Peter's legacy with her own brand of imperial ambition. Under her rule, Russia pushed southward, seizing lands from the weakening Ottoman Empire and gaining a foothold on the Black Sea. The partitions of Poland, carried out in concert with Prussia and Austria, brought vast new territories under Russian control, including much of modern-day Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania. These conquests transformed Russia into a true European superpower, feared and respected by its rivals. But with every new acquisition came new challenges. Governing such a sprawling, diverse empire required constant vigilance and ruthless efficiency. The Tsars relied on a powerful bureaucracy and a formidable military to keep order, but unrest simmered beneath the surface. Still, the age of empire was a time of triumph for Russia, period, when its rulers believed there were no limits to their reach. As the 19th century dawned, Russia stood at the crossroads of continents, its ambitions undimmed and its appetite for expansion as fierce as ever. But the world was changing fast, and new rivals were waiting in the wings, ready to test the might of the Russian colossus. The 19th century. Global power and the great game. By the dawn of the 19th century, Russia had become a true titan on the world stage, its borders stretching from the icy waters of the Baltic to the wind-swept shores of the Pacific. But with great size came even greater challenges. The empire's vastness was both a shield and a burden, demanding constant vigilance against threats from every direction. Now, Russia's ambitions collided with those of other global powers, sparking a new era of rivalry, intrigue, and high-stakes diplomacy known as the Great Game. This was a time when empires measured their strength not just in armies, but in influence and territory. Russia's expansion into Central Asia brought it into direct competition with the British Empire, which feared that Russian advances threatened its prized colony of India. The two giants eyed each other warily, sending spies, diplomats and soldiers into the wild frontiers of Afghanistan and Persia. The struggle for dominance in these remote lands was as much about prestige as it was about security. And every move was watched with suspicion in London and St. Petersburg alike. Rumors swirled of secret deals, shadowy agents, and plots to tip the balance of power, some true, others the stuff of legend. But Russia's ambitions didn't stop at Central Asia. In the Far East, the empire pressed against the borders of China, securing vast new territories and founding the port city of Vladivostok, a crucial outpost on the Pacific. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Russia's brief experiment with colonization in North America came to an end with the sale of Alaska to the United States in 1867. The deal, seen by some as a desperate move to raise funds and by others as a shrewd retreat from an indefensible frontier, remains a subject of speculation and debate even today. Back in Europe, Russia's military might was put to the test during the Napoleonic Wars. When Napoleon's Grand Army invaded in 1812, it was the sheer size of Russia and the merciless winter that turned the tide, decimating the French forces and cementing Russia's reputation as a nation that could not be conquered by force alone. Yet, for all its victories, the empire was not immune to internal strife. The 19th century saw waves of unrest, reform, and resistance, as new ideas swept in from the West and old certainties began to crumble. Still, the Russian Empire endured, its reach and influence unmatched by any other nation on earth. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. The pressures of governing such a vast, diverse realm were mounting. And the world was on the brink of changes that would shake even the mightiest empires to their core. As the century drew to a close, Russia stood at a crossroads, its future uncertain, its fate hanging in the balance, and the next chapter of its story about to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. Revolution, the Soviet era, and the modern federation. As the 20th century dawned, the Russian Empire was teetering on the edge of transformation. Decades of unrest, economic hardship, and political repression had left the nation simmering with discontent. The world watched as the old order began to unravel, and in 1917, the storm finally broke. The Russian Revolution erupted with a force that stunned even the most seasoned observers. The Tsarist regime, which had ruled for centuries with an iron grip, collapsed almost overnight. In its place, a new power emerged, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, who promised to build a society unlike any the world had ever seen. But the birth of the Soviet Union was anything but peaceful. A brutal civil war tore the country apart, pitting the Reds against the Whites in a struggle for control. When the dust finally settled, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics (USSR) had risen from the ashes of the old empire, uniting a vast array of peoples and territories under the banner of communism. The new regime moved quickly to consolidate its hold, reclaiming lands lost during the chaos, and forging a superstate that stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. Yet, not everyone accepted this new order. Poland, Finland, and the Baltic states seized the moment to declare independence, while others were drawn back into the Soviet fold by force or persuasion. The Soviet era was marked by both triumph and tragedy. The USSR became a global superpower, its influence felt in every corner of the world. It survived the devastation of World War II, emerging from the conflict with even more territory and a sphere of influence that extended deep into Eastern Europe. The Cold War that followed saw the Soviets locked in a tense, decades-long standoff with the United States, their rivalry shaping the fate of nations from Cuba to Afghanistan. But beneath the surface, the Soviet system was plagued by inefficiencies, stagnation, and growing unrest. By the 1980s, the cracks had become impossible to ignore. Despite attempts at reform, the Soviet Union could not escape the weight of its own contradictions. In 1991, after years of mounting pressure, the USSR dissolved in a wave of independence movements and political upheaval. 15 new countries emerged from its shadow, including the modern Russian Federation. Today, Russia remains the world's largest country, a vast, complex nation still grappling with the legacy of its imperial and Soviet past. Its borders, once drawn by conquest and revolution, now stand as a testament to centuries of ambition, struggle, and survival. And as the world changes around it, the question remains, what will the next chapter in Russia's story look like? Conclusion: looking back across the centuries, it's almost impossible not to be awed by the sheer scale of Russia's journey. from a patchwork of warring tribes to the world's largest country, a nation that spans continents and cultures, climates and histories. Every mile of Russian territory tells a story of ambition, resilience, and relentless adaptation. The borders we see on the map today are the result of countless battles, bold gambles, and moments when the fate of millions hung in the balance. But Russia's size has always been a double-edged sword. It has offered protection from invaders, a wealth of natural resources, and a sense of destiny that has driven its leaders to dream bigger than any before them. Yet, it has also brought challenges that few other nations have ever faced: vast distances to govern, diverse peoples to unite, and a constant struggle to balance tradition with the demands of a changing world. Throughout its history, Russia has been shaped by outsiders and insiders alike, by Vikings and Mongols, Tsars and revolutionaries, reformers and autocrats. Each era has left its mark, layering new ambitions and anxieties atop the old. The scars of Mongol domination, the grandeur of imperial expansion, the upheaval of revolution, and the shadow of the Soviet Union all linger in the Russian psyche, influencing how the nation sees itself and how it is seen by the world. Even today, debates rage over the legitimacy of Russia's borders, the legacy of its conquests, and the true cost of its relentless drive for greatness. Rumors and speculations swirl about secret deals, lost opportunities, and what might have been if history had taken a different turn. But perhaps the most surprising truth is that Russia's story is far from over. Its vastness remains both a source of strength and a test of endurance. The challenges of governing such a sprawling landmass are as real now as they were centuries ago, and the pressures of the modern world, economic uncertainty, shifting alliances, and the ever-present question of identity continue to shape the nation's path. As new generations come of age, they inherit not just the land, but the weight of its history and the responsibility to decide what comes next. So, as we close the chapter on how Russia became the world's biggest country, one question lingers: will its size continue to be its greatest asset, or will it become the challenge that finally forces Russia to reinvent itself once again? The answer, as always, lies somewhere beyond the horizon, waiting to be written in the next chapter of this extraordinary story.